name is Corine Hodges Thornton, and I was born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri. I had a younger brother, and we had loving parents. My father was a veteran of the World War I. He was in the Navy, and I think he found out how things really were in the world. A lot of farm boys found out about the real world in the First World War. And I grew up questioning authority. When I was about 11, I spent the summer with my grandmother in Los Angeles. Los Angeles was very beautiful without all the people that are there now. And blue sky, and I was impressed at all the beautiful orange trees. But my grandmother often took me to religious things, especially to hear Amy Semple McPherson, who was very popular at that time. But I just couldn't quite believe all the religious stuff. I never could accept all those fantastic stories. After that summer in Los Angeles, I went back to Kansas City, went to school, and at this time, the Spanish Civil War was starting. Francisco Franco was staged a coup, and the Republican government of Spain and the people fought back, and it was a very brutal war because Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini from Italy were sent aid to Franco, who was a fascist, as they were, and they were trying out all their new weapons and airplanes, and for the first time they sent bombers over Madrid and bombed the civilian population, and people all over the world were horrified at the death of so many people just walking in the streets. And I remember the Kansas City Star published pictures of them digging dead babies out of the rubble in the streets of Madrid, and it was a pretty horrifying thing to know that people could do things like that. And a lot of volunteers from all over the world went to Spain to fight against the fascists. There was a lot of sympathy for the Republican government, which was legally elected. The fascist Franco won the war because the governments of Britain and France and the United States wouldn't aid the duly elected government of Spain, even though the government of Spain tried to buy weapons with cash. They had the money, but the other governments wouldn't support them. And a lot of people call that coup in Spain the rehearsal for World War II, because 6 months after World War started, also the Kansas City Star was a pretty impressive paper at that time, and it actually had news in it, something we don't see much of these days. And the other thing that interested me was the general strike in 1934, the maritime strike in San Francisco, which brought the whole city to a stop. Nobody was working, and only official cars and ambulances and things like that could get gas.
When the Legion boys come around, she always stood her ground. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. Till the day I die.
The seamen and longshoremen won the strike, and it has been a strong union since then, but right now they need shoring up a bit, and the corporations keep trying to break the unions, and we can't let that happen, because people together are the ones that do the work and deserve the pay, not the corporations. When the Second World War started, I moved to California, and I was married. I had 6 children. I worked as a waitress many years, and I belonged to the Waitresses Union. And I still believe that working people together can make it a better world, and do away with the rich corporations that keep all the money. We can do away with war, and for many years I belonged to the Grandmothers for Peace, which is anti-war and anti-nuclear. Grandmothers for Peace started in Sacramento. A woman named Barbara Wiedner started demonstrating with a sign, Grandmothers for Peace. When I moved from Sacramento to San Francisco and to Hayward, I started a chapter of Grandmothers for Peace, and we often demonstrated at Livermore, where they have nuclear weapons and testing and stuff like that. So, and we had a group from Hayward that always went on to Livermore to demonstrate on Good Friday and the 6th and whatever, 8th, or whenever the nuclear bombs were first dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we haven't managed to stop nuclear weapons, but we've certainly raised the question of how bad it is. I also joined the School of the Americas Watch, which demonstrates against war and all that. In Fort Benning, Georgia, Father Roy Bourgeois, who was a Catholic priest, started this demonstration there against training troops from Central and South American countries at Fort Benning so that they could learn to be more brutal and more fascist. Many well-known people came to Fort Benning to demonstrate. Among them was Martin Sheen. At that time, he was playing in the West Wing, and he was the President of the United States. And he came on stage at Fort Benning one day and announced, "As President of the United States, I declare this place closed."
Lord, make us nonviolent instruments of your peace, so that we may lift up this weary world and all its people to a place where the heart is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depths of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sands of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action into that heaven of freedom, my Father. Let our country awake. Amen.
Many people, Pete Seeger and many Catholics.
Bishop in Spain in 1939, when Franco took over, said, "I must show the people that the church does not always side with the rich against the poor." And he started a movement within the Catholic Church, I think it's called Cursillo movement. And worker priests go into a factory and get a job and show that while legally they're not allowed to strike, there's lots of little things they can do to show the boss that he should improve things.
My husband Nate and I belong to an organization in San Francisco called Global Exchange. And one of the co-founders of that was Medea Benjamin. And she is also the co-founder of Code Pink, which is an anti-war group of women who are demonstrating, especially in Washington, D.C., at Congress and places like that, where they regularly get drug out by big guards, but they still go on yelling against the war. As a member of Global Exchange, Nate and I went to Cuba in '92 and in '93 with Medea Benjamin and the Global Exchange people. And of course, it's supposedly illegal to go to Cuba because we don't have diplomatic relations with them. That means they actually have their own government and don't kowtow to the United States. And it's called a communist country. And it's not completely, but they're working on it at least. And as my husband Nate is a veteran of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade who fought in Spain, he was welcomed in Cuba along with a group of former Spanish vets, and the Communist Party of Cuba gave us a reception, and it was a big party at their headquarters, and Fidel Castro was there and individually greeted each one of the former vets and their wives. And it was a very exhilarating experience. When we arrived at I think it was Houston, Texas, the customs took our passports away from us. And they had threatened us with $250,000 each in fees and 6 months in jail, but they didn't carry through on it. Jessica Mitford's son, who was fascinated by Cuba, he'd never been there before, but he was a piano tuner by trade, and he founded another organization called Send a Piano to Havana, because the humidity in Cuba caused all the strings to rust out on the pianos, and so ever since then the Treasury Department has been threatening to arrest him for sending all his pianos and parts to Cuba. This group that went to Cuba, we each took the limit of medical supplies and school supplies, because the United States has an embargo against Cuba, and they don't allow things to be shipped to Cuba. In 1989, Nate and I went to the Soviet Union with Grandmothers for Peace. We had a peace walk in Gorky Park in Moscow. And at that time, we each member or couple stayed in private homes in Moscow for the first time. And that was interesting. Nate and I stayed with a a couple. The man was a member of the Novotsky Press, and the woman was a teacher of English in the Moscow schools. In my 22-year marriage to Nate, I was more politically active than ever because we had like feelings on the working class taking over and getting their fair share of, they do the work, they should be paid for it. And we certainly are against war. We always demonstrated in organizing unions and things like that, and we did picket a hotel in San Francisco for a long time. And we also picketed against the Greyhound bus went on strike after one of the drivers was crushed to death against a wall by a bus driven by a scab bus driver up in Reading. I belong to a walking group called the Fort Point Gang, and Blanche Bebb was also a member of that group, and she belonged to the SEIU, and a lot of people belong to both of those organizations. And we just caused as much trouble as we could. An injury to one is an injury to all. And if we all stick together, we can win. Well, the young people of today really have a mess on their hands. We haven't been able to do what we started out to do, and now the young people are going to have to do it, and we can say we're sorry that it didn't work out, but they're going to have to take over. Reagan was a real bad example of a president, and it's been that way ever since, with Reagan breaking the air traffic controllers union. After he served 2 terms, his vice president, H.W. Bush, whatever his initials were, who just died and either thought he was a saint or something, the way they extolled him when he died. But he's the one that started the war between Iraq and Kuwait, and it's been downhill ever since then. And he killed over 3,000 Panamanians. Over the Panama Canal. and he didn't really do anything to be proud about. And Clinton was a disaster. And George Bush was a disaster. And then everybody was saying, oh, hope and change with Obama. Well, he was one of the worst, except he was very slick and a very accomplished speaker. But he went right on killing people all over the world, especially in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And they all condone Israel and the Mossad, their assassination group, all over the world. And we need to take care of that with boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning Israel. They have killed so many Palestinians, and it was the land was Palestinian in the first place, and they have acted like some of them were treated in Germany and Russia and Austria, places like Poland. Anyway, it's not a pretty sight, and we need to quit supporting Israel. Osama bin Laden, in the first place, was employed by the CIA, and all the Saudis were buddies with the Bush family and with Obama.
I think it's important to understand the announcement that occurred yesterday not through the lens of the announcement of the death of some terrorist mastermind so much as the retirement party for a known CIA asset along the lines of Lee Harvey Oswald back in November 1963. And I think Lee Harvey Oswald is probably the best analog for Osama bin Laden as someone who did not have the means, motive, or opportunity to do what he allegedly did, not only killing President Kennedy, but also waltzing in and out of the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War after having been working at the top-secret Atsugi Air Force Base with no questions asked, using money that he didn't have at the time. In the same way, we see Osama bin Laden being the rogue element of the bin Laden family of construction fortune, who, of course, has deep ties to the oligarchy of Texas and, of course, the Bush family.
It was a put-up job with Dick Cheney. I mean, those airplanes didn't bring those buildings down. That couldn't happen, and nobody talks about the one that flew into the Pentagon or the one that crashed in Pennsylvania. It was all planned. Dick Cheney didn't tell me. Maybe he didn't even tell George Bush. I don't know.
On the morning of September 11th,
anyway,
2001, the United States was under attack. Terrorists had taken over commercial airliners and were using them as weapons. The attacks unfolded live on television screens around the world. Journalists faced unprecedented obstacles covering the story.
As close as we can get to the base of the world. Fire. as I tilted on.
The logistical challenges were the cell lines went down, cell phones stopped
Osama
working,
bin Laden.
landlines were hard to get through.
I don't know what the story was about him, but Obama cooked up some kind of a deal to get rid of him. The thing about Obama that made me so mad was that he supported the governor who okayed changing the water system in Flint, Michigan from the good water that from the one of the Great Lakes to the polluted river, and all the kids got lead poisoning, and he supported him. And pretended to drink some of the water out of the river. What a phony.
There you go. You know, generally I have not been doing stunts here, but, you know. And this used a filter. You know, the water around this table, you know, was Flint water that was filtered. And it just confirms what we know scientifically, which is that if you're using a filter, if you're installing it, then Flint water at this point is drinkable.
I certainly wouldn't have voted for Hillary Clinton in the first place after her stint as Secretary of State. She's a warmonger and would have started a war with Russia. Trump is the greatest phony of all. And I swear I don't know how it happened. The young people in this era are going to have to take over, and they're going to have to be tough. And it's very hopeful with the new women in Congress. And I hope that they stand their ground and keep learning. They have a lot to learn, but like being sure they don't call the president what he is in a bar where somebody can overhear him. But all these young people, it's very hopeful. They just need to keep on learning, and I admire the people in Puerto Rico, especially after that hurricane, and they don't need to take any crap off of Trump handing out paper towels. What a disgusting ploy. And those people need to convert to solar power because the sun shines there most of the time, and they don't need fossil fuel. And that's the type of thing we need to learn. The boss is not your friend. Hardly ever. A lot of young people that work in these tech places think they're a power within themselves. They've been taught that unions are bad because everyone has to work together for the good of all, and they've been brainwashed. an injury to one is an injury to all. All these young people think they can make it on their own, and they can't. You have to work together. You have to work for the good of all, not just yourself. But it's good if you can make things good for yourself and your family. That's great, but you have to all be equal.